Welcome to the Rise Together podcast weekly hot take series. Every week, we're going to bring you powerful stories and strategies from leaders who are making a real impact by building stronger, more resilient communities. Get ready to be inspired, motivated, and equipped with the tools to thrive in both your personal and professional life.
Hi, everybody. I'm Beth Almaris with the Foundation for Family and Community Healing. We at the Foundation are really dedicated to helping individuals and organizations build strength and resilience through skill-based education. I'm really excited to talk to my guest today, Arvetta Jideonwo, who is faculty at Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy and also has her own consulting business, and I'll let her introduce herself in just a sec. Arvetta, thanks for coming today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Beth. I'm just happy to be here today. Again, I'm an adjunct faculty member at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I also have my own consulting firm, SGS for Good.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, Arvetta's going to talk about all things philanthropy, especially those of us in the nonprofit sector are really going to get a lot out of today's conversation. All right, so can you give me a little bit, just a brief overview?
Sure, I can give you some background. The Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy was actually established in 1987. It is the first school of philanthropy in the nation and offers lots of research, of course, great degree programs at the bachelor's, graduate level, and also doctorate level. We're the first school to offer a doctorate in philanthropic studies as well, and it's established right here in Indianapolis, Indiana. One of the largest aspects of what the school does on a national level, it produces the research that goes into something that's called the Giving USA report, which is established and written by the Giving USA Foundation, which is headquartered in Chicago, Illinois. So that is a report that comes out every year that talks about philanthropy, and it outlines giving and all the data surrounding giving in the United States. So the School of Philanthropy actually provides the research to back up that report.
That's interesting. So, I mean, you've been in philanthropy for a really long time, and it's one of those fields that folks either get or they don't, I think. Like, they're really passionate about it, or folks are like, oh, that seems really hard.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because most individuals kind of fall into philanthropy. You don't find that many individuals say when they go to school they want to study philanthropic studies. However, at the School of Philanthropy, of course, we're hoping that students decide to do that earlier. But in most cases, you find individuals that are working in philanthropy, whether they're at a nonprofit organization, a foundation, or even a corporation, they are just doing this almost as a second career, if you will. But it is great work. It is really about relationship building, which is the core of working for a nonprofit organization. But there is a science to it. To philanthropy as well. And it's an important science to learn as you're in this, arena, if you will. So as I noted, I have been in this, doing this work, working at several organizations, leading foundations here in Central Indiana. I've worked for a for-profit institution as well as many nonprofit organizations, higher education institutions, and I spent about 10 years working at different hospitals and healthcare organizations as well. So I have a lot of experience in doing this work and doing philanthropy, not only within different types of organizations, but on both sides of the philanthropic process. So the process of fund seeking, so applying for
Mm-hmm.
grants and funds, and also on the giving side. So actually working
Yeah.
for a foundation and distributing funds to grantees and building those relationships.
That is my dream. I've got to say, I've been on The Seeker for over 20 years now. Through I've spent my my career in nonprofits, and so whether it's your sole role in a nonprofit, almost everybody does some sort of fundraising, right?
Yeah.
So, so that the whole thought of being able to give folks money and to help shepherd their projects and kind of use everything you've learned over the years running projects and pilots and doing all these things. That's so exciting to me. So maybe
Yeah.
one day.
Yeah.
Maybe one day.
Fingers
Um,
crossed on that one.
Yeah. So how do you think the field has changed over the years? I would say particularly the fund seeking has really changed a lot.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
want to
it's
speak
so
to that a
funny
little bit?
because it's a good question and it's very timely in that, as you're aware, with
Mm,
changes in our new administration, in a lot of the proposed legislative changes in terms of government, that has certainly had a potential impact on nonprofit
for
organizations.
sure.
So what we find, if you look at the last Giving USA report that came out in 2024, you will find that there was a increase in terms of dollars that were distributed across the United States, a little bit over $500 billion dollars. However, there was a decrease in the number of donors. So that is a
Interesting.
trend that we have seen at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. And also, I would say, just in general, with nonprofit organizations, nonprofits are finding that they're having to work harder to engage with donors. I've seen that in working with clients in the past and also at nonprofit organizations as well. I have seen that. So it is becoming more challenging for nonprofits today. And the reason why is that we find that donors, tend to be a little bit less engaged. In addition to, a major concern, and I'm not speaking here on behalf of the fundraising school, but, in terms of what Arvetta says in terms of philanthropy, I am really concerned about the impact on nonprofits in with this new administration, essentially, because there have been proposals to, actually halt federal funding. And thanks to organizations like the National Council of Nonprofits and Democracy Forward, they actually put forward a lawsuit against the government in order to halt that. So those nonprofits have not been affected. However, we are still seeing that, in certain organizations, they are still being potentially impacted. So about 30% of our nonprofits nationwide receive some sort of federal funding. So
Hmm.
that's important to note. So that is a significant number of organizations that would be impacted. One of the things that these organizations that I'm hearing in terms of strategies would be to make sure that they continue to work to diversify funding. And, what
Hmm.
that means in the nonprofit world is ensuring that you have a plethora of funding sources. So not just funds from a federal perspective, but you have funds from foundations and corporations, and most importantly, individuals. Most people don't realize this, but about 65% of all philanthropy given in the United States actually comes from individuals. So it is to the benefit of nonprofit organizations to really work hard to make sure that they're bringing in dollars from individuals and really diversifying funding so that when issues arise, like what we've experienced in the past, 60 days, since the new administration has taken over.
What seems
Yeah,
impossible, only
it's
60 days.
in 60 days. But in order to kind of prevent that, this is an opportunity now for nonprofits to really take a look at their funding sources and then also look for areas of opportunity in terms of earned income, ways that they can generate
Yeah.
funds from even a social enterprise perspective as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
Yeah.
that's becoming increasingly more important. And then, the other thing that these 60 days have brought us is a real hit to the economy. And so people are going to be tightening their belts, right? Where a lot of
Yes.
folks are experiencing layoffs, and obviously when people are financially strapped, they're not giving.
Right.
Right? So it's kind of the perfect storm right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's interesting you bring that up because, that is, kind of immediately we think about individuals that are, middle class, the upper middle class that, they're going to hold back on their giving. But we are also seeing that individuals that are high net worth donors, they are doing so as well. So it really does affect the entire market, if you will, of potential individual donors because there is a level of uncertainty. So just because you have, so much in disposable income, it doesn't mean that you're going to be giving, at the same levels that you were giving last year,
Yeah.
this year, based upon, what is currently happening. So I think that's a great add-on that you bring up because, you know, we start thinking about what are some of the things that motivate donors, and certainly, uncertainty does have an impact.
Yeah. The, what one of the questions I've always had is so since the onset of all of these different fundraising platforms like GoFundMe, and you can do through Facebook, what kind of impact has that had on donor fatigue? I feel like as a donor myself, I get asked 85 different ways from Sunday for money every time I open up my computer, and I'm in the nonprofit industry, so I believe in it, but it is a lot, and a lot of the asks are actually not coming from nonprofits, right? There are a lot of private citizens or groups that aren't nonprofits that are also asking for money too. So
Yeah, I think you bring up a very good point. There is a such thing as donor fatigue, and those different platforms that you're referring to are, a lot of them are crowdfunding platforms that nonprofits use, but also individuals, can set up their own GoFundMe, as well. So there is a lot out there, and it does certainly have an impact, especially on nonprofits that are legitimately working hard to cultivate relationships with their donors. One of the things that I would always encourage, and different roles I was in, I've led development teams, is to really focus on not making an ask every time you're in contact with donors. One of the old sayings we have in philanthropy is if you want to get a gift from a donor, ask them for advice first. So you want to bring donors in. You want them to understand what your mission is, what you're trying to do. Asking them for advice, contacting them beyond the gift. On average, we say on average, you should thank a donor about 7 to 8 times in between their gifts. It seems like a lot, but if you figure you're thanking them through an email or a phone call, or you're contacting them, in other ways,
right.
the contact should not always be, what have you done for me lately,
Right.
if you will.
Yeah.
It should
Yes.
be truly, them getting to know your organization, developing that relationships. And those are the relationships that sustain organizations beyond what we're going through right now. So that is the reason why, I said at the beginning, when we're trying to get past these, issues with dealing with, federal funding woes and, heavy reliance on, and not just from a federal funding perspective, but grants in general, temporary funding. Having those relationships with donors, individual relationships, are the ones that really can help to sustain organizations for the long term.
Yeah.
And that's really the ultimate goal. You want to develop those relationships so you're, taking your donors up the donor pyramid, if you will, into making major gifts, transformational gifts, and planned gifts, wills and estates and things of that nature
Yeah.
to your organization.
Yeah, I mean, what you said at the top of the conversation, it really is a science, right? It's a field of study. There are, I think, a lot of folks, especially in smaller organizations, right? Like they don't understand necessarily how much work goes into development, and it's really remarkable that
Yeah.
the what is it, about 18 months for to establish a relationship. Like it there's a
Mhm.
long it's a long game.
Yes.
It's a
It
long
is
game,
a long
and then
game.
it's that care and feeding, right, of those relationships over the years, and growing together, and people. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just really interesting, and I think we're really faced. I think COVID showed us a lot of cracks in kind of all of it, and now we're facing yet a new, challenge to the
Yeah.
field. So um, I'm really curious what you see as some future, like things that are coming down the pike, or things that we might want to look into as people that are in this field.
Yeah. I mean, it just a lot of the things that I have already mentioned, which is to really work to diversify your revenue streams, as a
Hmm.
nonprofit organization. Focusing on not just those philanthropic revenue streams, whether it's funds from individuals, corporations, foundations, aside from, the federal funding, but also looking at opportunities to earn income and create a social enterprise. I led a foundation here in Indianapolis for about 8 years, called Bosma Visionary Opportunities Foundation. And the organization itself, Bosma Enterprises, serve people who are blind or visually impaired.
Hmm.
And this organization ran a very strong social enterprise model where people who are blind or visually impaired were packing and distributing gloves for veteran hospitals across the country. That contributed to a significant percentage of the organization's revenue. So the organization was able to kind of create this, strong revenue stream to sustain its operations, as well as the philanthropy was an added benefit, so that the organization could continue to provide programs for people who are blind or visually impaired. And there are a lot of organizations that have similar models to that. Probably
Sure.
one of the most glaring examples is Goodwill. And Goodwill is a very large, large organization nationwide, has several, different organizations throughout the country. But certainly they have that model, and that certainly helps with their operations. But there are other things that smaller nonprofits can do to sell a line of business that would help to support their revenue outside of the philanthropy, relying completely on that. And philanthropy is, I think it's key. A lot of organizations, they have to have it in order to sustain. So I'm by no means saying do away with it. I'm just saying add another crayon to your box, if you will.
For sure.
Of, add, this piece of, looking at opportunities to earn income. I've seen organizations start a coffee shop. I've seen just a lot of different strategies that, you wouldn't think that a nonprofit would do, but nonprofits have to start being creative and innovative in this time.
Yeah.
So while a lot of this is, these challenges are really, devastating to hear in, the impact that could be potentially had on nonprofits and philanthropy in general, I think this is the time to keep energized, start thinking creatively about ways to really diversify funding, and how we might not end up in this situation again, right?
Yeah.
Getting past this. So yeah, I think that, those are some of the things that I would look at, and continually, I couldn't emphasize enough, staying in front of donors, during this time. If, as a nonprofit, you are being impacted by what is happening, making sure that you're communicating that and what the impacts have been and will be potentially, is important to donors as well, because believe me, they're watching the news too, and
Mhm.
they are certainly, wondering if there is anything, if their organizations, whether on the board or they're volunteering or just giving, is being impacted by what's going on. So I couldn't stress that enough as a nonprofit philanthropy leader, to make sure that you're doing that.
Yeah, thank you for that. One last quick question because you just mentioned the board. Can you talk a little bit about how a board can really help with fundraising and philanthropy? Because, not all boards are as active as others. And so I think that might be really helpful for folks to hear.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up, because as I, have worked with many different organizations from a consulting standpoint, and I even currently serve on boards myself, not, one size doesn't, fit all, right? So boards are, obviously differ in size and capabilities. But essentially, what you're looking for in a strong nonprofit board is for individuals to bring their time, their talent, and their treasure to the board. So when you serve in a board capacity, you serve on a board, you're in a governing capacity. And in that, what means a lot is at times you're able to make connections. Those board members are able to make connections that maybe the ED of the organization or president, CEO of the organization, they may not have those connections. So, making sure as board members that you are actually doing that, and not just, a warm body, if you will, because these organizations, especially in critical times like now, they really need this level of support, a higher level of support. I often call board members, they are high level volunteers.
Hmm.
So that should be committed to, effectuating the mission of the organization, and communicating that within, their circles and making those proper connections. And what I encourage a lot of nonprofits to do is to hold their board members accountable. So creating a board expectation statement for every member to sign, that includes, measurable objectives, how many connections that they're going to make this year, how much they're going to give, their meeting attendance. All those things should be laid out so that it's clear to the board member and the organization staff leadership, what the expectations are. So not only setting those in place, but also checking on those, on a quarterly basis, having check-ins with board members to see how are things going. So that's an important aspect, as a board member, taking that role seriously from a board member perspective, but from the nonprofit perspective, also making sure that you're getting what you need from those board members. Because that really is the purpose of a board, is to
Yes.
elevate, not just fundraise, but elevate the organization, make connections, and the fundraising piece is also certainly a good aspect too. One of the things, and this will be my last comment here because this is something I hear a lot about with boards, is I often hear, well, I can drop my name, or, I can, just tell them that that I told you to contact them, and they make connections that way. But a lot of board members need to understand that's not good enough. We need you to walk along with us, walk alongside with us, and keep those connections going. We understand busy schedules as staff members, but from a board perspective, we have to continue to shepherd and cultivate that relationship.
Yeah.
And don't worry about, a lot of board members say, well, I'm not a fundraiser. But in most cases, the board members are not the ones asking. It's typically the staff member that's asking. But we would love to have the board member there to also, support the organization.
Yeah.
It adds credibility and legitimacy and all the things that we want to see to elevate the organization.
Yeah. Especially for
Yeah.
really small organizations, the board is just priceless. So thank
Yeah.
you for that. Well, this has been a great conversation. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure folks did as well. So thank you so much, Arvetta, and thank you to our listeners. I'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you, Beth. It was my pleasure.
Thank you for joining us today on our Rise Together podcast weekly hot take series. We hope you've been inspired by today's stories and strategies for building stronger, more resilient communities. Remember, resilience isn't just about bouncing back. It's about growing through every challenge to become bigger and better. If you've enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with somebody who could benefit from these insights. Stay connected, stay resilient, and we'll see you next time.